Okay, on this page, we're going to look at ordering decimals. So ordering decimals would be pretty much the same thing as comparing decimals, except when you're ordering, you're probably going to be dealing with some type of greatest to least or least to greatest um, type question. Sometimes it could be like a race, who's finished first, who finished second, who finished third, that type of question. But the math pretty much is just the same thing. You're just going to have an order. And so I put about 6 numbers on this page. We're going to try to order these. We're going to kind of treat it like 2 separate questions. So I'm going to look up here at the top first. So at the top, I'm seeing that I have 3 numbers. I have 339 thousandths, I have 349 thousandths, and I have 344 thousandths. If I were to look at these 3 numbers, it would be really pretty simple to order them from either greatest to least or least to greatest, because I'm going to take the same strategy as comparing. I'm going to make sure that they're lined up nice and neat. So I'm going to start with 339, then I'm going to start with 349, and then I'm going to start with 344. All right, so looking at these numbers now, I'm really just starting to think, okay, I've got all 3 of them are going to the thousands. I don't need to add any zeros in. I'm just simply looking for which one's, the biggest, which one's kind of in the middle, and then which one is the smallest one. And so I'm going to pretend like I'm going to go greatest to least here. So off to the side, I'm just going to put a little note, G to L, from greatest to least. Okay, so the biggest number that I could tell here by looking at it would be 349 thousandths. And that's because if I go to this place right here and really kind of just looking at numbers, I'm really comparing 339 to 349 to 344. So I'm going to write that this is the biggest number, 349 thousandths. Then the second largest one would have to be 344 thousandths. And then the smallest would have to be 339 thousandths. So you wouldn't really have to do a lot of extra work there other than just lining them up and making sure you're being really careful with your place value. You're being nice and neat. And really just comparing some 3-digit numbers. And again, if this were me in my class, if I had a kid struggling, I'd say, you know what, don't even worry about that decimal. Just compare, your 3-digit numbers. So if you're sitting there looking at it, that's pretty easy to compare. 349 is bigger than 344. 344 is bigger than 339. All right, the bottom problem, you'd have to do a little bit more work here. And so I'm going to start with, I want to see if I can't squeeze this onto the bottom. So I've got 34 hundredths, I've got 430 thousandths, and then I have 49 hundredths. And so my first step would be lining them up. But then by looking at them, I could tell, well, one of them goes to the thousandths, but the other 2 do not. So after lining them up, I would start adding up, adding my zeros in to make them look the same. And then by doing that, this would be pretty easy to order. This time I'm going to flip it. I'm going to go least to greatest. So out to the side, I'm going to put L to G. And I'm going to start looking for the smallest one first. So the smallest one, if I go place value here, go into the 10ths place, the 3 is smaller than the 4s. So I'm going to start with 340 thousandths. Then I'm going to go with 430 thousandths. 430 is not as big as 490. And then I'm going to tack on that last one here as 490 thousandths. And again, when I look at this, I'm simply just kind of thinking to myself, all right, my job was to order them. I've got to line up the decimals. I've got to add zeros. And once I do that, that makes my life pretty easy. This next page, these are just some problems, again, I took out of the book. These are, pretty standard, what you might see. These are good 5th grade numbers. You're just going to have to do the work to order them. So notice both problems are dealing with greatest to least. So I'm going to start with number 7. I'm going to pull them out to the side. I'm going to line up my decimals. And I'm going to make sure everything is nice and neat. And then once that's done, I'm going to really start comparing and ordering. So Looks like I've got my 4 numbers, lined up my decimals. I'm going to tack on some zeros. And then now, if I'm going to go greatest to least, the first thing I might start looking at are, the whole numbers. Well, they're all 7s. They're all 7 and something. So then my eyes would shift to the 10th place. And in the 10th place, I've got a couple of zeros. I've got an 8 and a 1. So the 8 most definitely is the biggest out of all 4. So I'm going to go back over to my list, and I'm just going to write that number. That number is 7 and 810 thousandths. Now I'm going to put a comma because we're going greatest to least, and I want to make sure that I'm not forgetting any of them. I've got 3 other numbers to put in. All right, sometimes what I like doing is if I've put one on my list, my official answer here, I'm going to get rid of it so it's not in the way. All right, so the next one, I still see those zeros, but then I also see the one at the bottom that has a 1. So that one is going to be my next biggest number, which would be 7 and 140 thousandths. So I'm going to put a comma in, line goes through that, finish with that. And now I only have 2 left. And it's kind of like this. Now that I have those 2 left, it's kind of easy to spot because really when I'm comparing, it looks like I'm comparing 81 to 2. Well, 81 is much bigger than 2, so my next official one that goes on my list here would be 7 and 81 thousandths. And then process of elimination gives me down to 7 and 2 thousandths being my smallest. All right, same thing on this bottom problem. I'm going to go through this a little quicker. I'm going to start with lining up everything. I'm going to line this up, and on a lot of these numbers, they have a 0 in for the ones place. You could keep that, but I'm actually going to get rid of it. And the reason why I'm going to get rid of it is it's just one extra thing I have to write. And since they all have zeros, then I really don't need it. If I'm going to be making a list here from greatest to least, it's kind of like saying, well, there's no whole numbers here. These are all decimal numbers. And so I'm going to leave that off. It's just one extra thing I have to write. What I am going to do is I'm going to make sure they all look the same. And I know I'm kind of down towards the bottom of the page here, but I think you could tell what I did. So I've lined up the decimals. I have all my numbers now. And then I'm simply just going to start looking in my 10th place. All right, which one is the biggest? I'm still going greatest to least. Well, my biggest one was really 5 tenths, but I'm going to write it as 500 thousandths. 500 thousandths is the same thing as 5 tenths because those zeros hold a place. They just don't have any value. So I'm going to put a comma. I'm going to scratch that one out. My next one that I'm seeing is 133 thousandths. I'm going to put my decimal, 133 thousandths, comma, scratch that one out. And now I'm down to just 2 left. And it's kind of like a second ago. When I get here, I'm just kind of looking at numbers in general. I'm comparing 40 to 21. Well, I know 40 is bigger than 21, so I'm going to go with, in this case, 40 thousandths. My last one looks like 21 thousandths. So after looking at this, lining them up, I've got a good order here, greatest to least. On both numbers, I showed my work. This is what I was talking about in the previous video. This is something that you have to do. You can't get lazy. You got to line up your decimals. You got to add your zeros, show your work. It makes your life much easier when you do that.